I'm going to take some time to look at the Appearances palette in Illustrator. The Appearances palette is really powerful, something you should really get used to and understand. Before I get into it, though, I want to just describe why it's powerful. And so when you're creating a shape in Illustrator, you have these two options. You have fill and you have stroke. And the default, if you hit D or just click this button, is a white fill with a 1-point black stroke. That's the default. To change this, I would have to typically go into my colors palette, click on the fill, change my color, click on the stroke, change the color of my stroke. Maybe I could use the swatches palette and change the color of that stroke to dark green. If I want the stroke to be bigger, I have to go into the strokes palette, change that up, make it look the way I want it to look. If I wanted to have a gradient instead of that fill, I could create a gradient and put that on there instead, change those colors if I wanted to whatever I wanted to work with, and maybe I want it to be a radial gradient. So I can work with my images that way. But it takes a fair amount of time. If I wanted to have a transparency on my object, I could click the Transparencies palette, select my object, change it to 50% transparency, so now the entire object is transparent. If I drag it over another object, you can see that it's allowing those objects to be seen below. So that's great, very versatile, useful, but you can do a lot more with appearances. So to get to that, you click this little icon, and I'm going to go ahead and just tear this off because I'm going to use it a lot. Put that away. And or you can go to Window, Appearance. Oops. So you'll notice if I click on any object, it changes automatically, and it's giving me all the information I was finding going to all these different menus. So I've got my stroke, my fill, and my opacity. So let's click on this circle. Now if I wanted to change my opacity, I don't have to go to another menu. I can stay in here, and I can just change it here. So now I've got the same exact effect that I had before, without having to go all over the place into different menus. Furthermore, let's put this back to 100%. Let's say I didn't want the stroke to be transparent. I just wanted the fill to be transparent. So I can go down here. These little carrots open up a new opacity for each of these features. So the fill has its own opacity. Now I can come down and change just the opacity. So my circle now has only the opacity transparent. I can also do the same thing with the stroke. Let's say I wanted to set the stroke to multiply and make it transparent. Maybe I want the opacity set to screen. So I want it to brighten things up, but the opacity, the stroke to darken things. Now when I move my object around, you can see the difference when it's overlaying an object. So you can create these kinds of effects pretty quickly by using the Appearances palette. Let's go ahead and set those back to normal. Now I'll leave them where they are. I'm going to work with this red square now. So we've already seen that I can change the the stroke. I'll give this a blue stroke, changing the thickness of it, and I'm going to change the type to round. So I just clicked on the word stroke. That brings this palette up rather than having to go over here. I can change the way this looks. So that's great. I have the same control I had before, all in one location. Another thing that I can do is actually add new strokes to one object. You don't have to copy objects and stack them on top of each other. I can just add a new stroke. So this object now has 2 strokes. Let's make this one a 3-point, and let's make it yellow, like yellowy orange. Okay, I've done this, but I can't see it. Why can't I see it? Well, that has to do with the stacking order here. So let's click this, just drag the layer up, click and drag. I'm going to put it about above that stroke, just laying it right on top of the blue one. And now you can see that stroke is working. So it's showing me that yellow. Let's drag this guy out of the way here. Showing me the yellow. Let's say I wanted to do something like a dotted line. I can come in and do that now. If I wanted this stroke to be transparent and just barely on top of that blue, I could do that. Change it to screen perhaps. So as long as you've got this object selected, you can change all of these features. Anytime you come back to it, all those features come back up again. With the fill, we can do even more. We can say we want a new fill, and that's this solid button here, add new fill. And so you can see right away that's put it on top of the old fill. And let's pick something like this gradient. Okay, I like this particular gradient. Right now it's covering up the red fill. What I want to do is to have this gradient show up as a screen, so I'm just going to put this as screen. And then I'm going to change the opacity down a little bit. Okay, so now I'm getting this gradient orange, which is pretty nice. While I've got this gradient selected, I can now go back into my gradients palette, change it to something like radial if I wanted to do that, get a different effect. And tighten up these differences so it's a little more obvious on the screen. Maybe I want it to be a little bit more opaque. Okay, I'm starting to like the way that looks. What if I wanted a pattern in here too? Okay, I'll try to put a pattern in between these two, so I can go to my swatches palette and pick a pattern that I might have available. I don't know, I've just replaced my red one. I need to go first to new fill, change that to the pattern. Now I'll drop this down in between these two. So now I've got red fill, pattern fill, gradient fill. And you can see that the gradient fill is actually working on top of the pattern right now. So what I might want to do is change my pattern to multiply, so that it's sort of darkening it, and then turn down the opacity so I'm getting the effect that I want. I think normal's better. I'll just change the opacity. Okay, so that's a nice subtle effect. Now let's say I want to keep this. So I've worked so hard to create this lovely effect that I want to use over and over and over again. I'm starting to think I don't like this stroke on top, so I think I'm going to put it on the bottom. So what happens if I put this stroke all the way down? Aha, okay. So now I've got that stroke on the bottom, this stroke right on top of that one, and you can see what that's doing is putting that stroke right on the edge. Okay, and that's what I was looking for. I really like that effect. So I want to save this so that I can use it on other objects in the future. How can I do that? Well, the way you do that is to use the graphic styles palette. So let's pull that up. I can simply drag this icon from here into there. Now I've created a new graphic styles item. I can double click this and call it my cool style. And now that's going to be saved with this file so that I can use it on other things. So I can now just take this, drag it over to my star, take this, drag it over to my... I can make everything filled with this pattern if I want to, just by dragging it over. So pretty versatile. One other thing I wanted to cover is working with groups. So I'm just going to quickly go to another file here, copy this group out, and paste it in. Okay. So now I've got a group of objects together, and you can see that they have a stroke applied to them as a whole. So the way that's done is actually by using the Appearances palette. And you can see when you have a grouped selection like this, it says group right here, and then it says contents right here. And you can see that the stroke is below the contents. So if I were to put that stroke above the contents, it's applying it to every object individually. Putting it below contents applies it only to the group as a whole. So if I were to use my group selection tool and move these around, you can see that that stroke is applied only to that group of, only to the individual items in that group as an outside layer. So it's actually applying it outside the red stroke of the star, and anytime they overlap, it applies it to them together as a whole. So do spend some time working around working with the Appearances palette. You can create some really great effects and save them and use them in your work.